It's a gloomy day here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon. Here are today's highlights. Korea's current account surplus narrowed in July from the previous year, mainly due to the widened deficit in the services and travel sectors. There are growing concerns over the geopolitical risks stemming from North Korea and its impact on the South Korean economy. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. But first, Korea's economy grew at a slower pace in the second quarter, according to OECD data released on Tuesday. It shows the Korean economy expanded 0.6% in the April to June period, with on-quarter growth ranking a lowly 18th out of the 27 OECD members. This is a sharp decline compared to the 1.1% expansion seen in the first quarter. 13 of the 27 countries saw their economic growth accelerate, while the rest suffered slowdowns or stagnation. There are uncertainties on whether Korea's economy will pick up pace in the second half of this year, with geopolitical risks from North Korea leading to worries that the local economy could stagnate even further. The Bank of Korea has released its preliminary data on the country's current account for July. And while it's showing a surplus, it has narrowed on year, mainly due to a larger deficit in the services sector. Here's our Kim Hae-sung with the details.
According to the Bank of Korea Tuesday, Korea's current account surplus, a measure of cross-border trade, was around $7.3 billion in July. This marks 65 months of consecutive growth, but on year, the current account surplus is down more than 13%. The bank attributed the drop to the services balance, which saw a deficit of over $3 billion in July. Korea's travel balance was hit particularly hard in July, recording a deficit of around $1.8 billion due to a rise in overseas trips by Koreans and fall in the number of foreigners visiting Korea. The number of foreigners visiting Korea fell 40% on year in July to around 1 million, with the number of Chinese tourists plummeting almost 70% on year. Between January and July, number of tourists visiting Korea dropped over 20% on year to 7.7 million. Duty-free shops were particularly badly affected by the decline in tourist numbers. According to the Korea Duty-Free Association, over 70% of its sales last year came from Chinese and other foreign visitors. But following China's de facto travel ban in March in retaliation for Korea's THAAD deployment, duty-free shops saw their second quarter revenue drop sharply. One of Korea's largest duty-free shop operators, Lotte Duty Free, saw its second quarter operating losses reach over $26 million. According to a Lotte official on Monday, Lotte Duty Free is considering pulling its business out of Incheon International Airport, where the rental fee is set to rise from September. With tensions on the Korean peninsula rising amid the North's provocations and the continuous decline in the number of Chinese tourists visiting Korea, there are concerns that the country's service industry will not see a turnaround anytime soon. Kim Hae-sung, Business Daily.
Korea's trade volume is projected to surpass the $1 trillion mark by the end of this year. This is according to Baek Un-gyu, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, who spoke at a meeting in Seoul earlier today. He said with the country's exports surging by double digits every month since the beginning of the year, trade volume has reached roughly $600 billion as of July. At the current pace, Korea's total trade volume in 2017 is set to reach roughly $1.3 trillion by the year's end. Now, if you're watching us from Korea, prepare to put your feet up for a while. Koreans will be enjoying an extended holiday weekend next month after the Moon administration designated October 2nd as a temporary holiday. Coupled with National Foundation Day, the Chuseok holidays, Hangul Day, and 2 weekends on either side, workers will enjoy a 10-day break without interruption. Let's listen to President Moon's announcement.
10월 2일을 임시공휴일로 지정하면 우리 국민들은 추석 연휴와 함께 사상 유례 없는 10일간의 긴 연휴를 보내게 됩니다. 국민들께서 모처럼 휴식과 위안의 시간이 되었으면 합니다.
During his bi-weekly cabinet meeting, that is, President Moon also acknowledged the serious security situation following North Korea's nuclear test. But the decision was made nonetheless in order to give workers and firms plenty of time to prepare for the holidays. He also stressed the holiday will serve as an opportunity to boost domestic demand and revitalize the economy. President Moon ordered the cabinet to come up with measures to minimize any negative effects that may be caused due to the long break. And taking a look at the stock market action, Korean equities tumbled once again, nearing a 2-month low amid tensions over North Korea's nuclear test. At the closing bell, the Kospi fell 0.13% to close at 2,326.62, while the tech-heavy Kosdaq finished 0.33% lower to finish at 648.75. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean won strengthened against the greenback, ending at 1,131.11 to the dollar. The main bourse was weighed by sharp losses in the finance and automobile sectors, but foreign investors seem to be taking a wait-and-see approach. One local brokerage says the Kospi may fall to as low as 2,200 before recovering. According to new details, the U.S. called on Korea to abolish tariffs on its agricultural products during the first meeting of the joint FTA committee last month. Citing sources inside U.S. Trade reported on Monday that Washington asked Seoul to immediately drop all of its remaining agricultural tariffs. Seoul's trade ministry declined to comment on the report, but the Korean government has long vowed to protect the nation's agricultural sector from any revisions to the trade pact. The U.S. demanded a formal review of the bilateral trade pact back in July after U.S. President Donald Trump labeled the FTA a horrible deal for American workers. And amid continued provocations from North Korea, U.S.-based experts are saying it's not the right time for U.S. President Donald Trump to talk tough on the South Korea US FTA. Our Kim Mo-kyun has more.
Just a day before North Korea held its 6th nuclear test on Sunday, news outlets reported on President Trump's plan to renegotiate or even withdraw from the free trade deal between Washington and Seoul. After the nuclear test, experts on Korea expressed regret over the U.S. president's plan, calling it foolish and self-destructive. During an interview with Seoul-based Yonhap news agency, Robert Manning, a senior fellow from the Atlantic Council, criticized Trump for raising the possibility of withdrawing from the Korea US FTA, calling it foolish and the worst plan in this situation. Alan Romberg, the director of the East Asia program at the Stimson Center, also said that Washington's plan to withdraw from the free trade deal is an irrational, self-defeating act, especially at a time when it's obvious that strong solidarity between allies is crucial in the face of North Korean provocations. He added that the U.S. president needs to give South Korea the political space to make possible alterations to the deal in a framework of collaboration and not confrontation. Ken Goss, the director of the International Affairs Group at the Center for Naval Analysis, said that it will be difficult for Seoul to confront its biggest threat coming from North Korea when its closest ally imposes such economic pressure on the country. The Korea Economic Institute also said that if Washington withdraws from the FTA, it will harm both nations' economic and security benefits, as well as weaken the influence of the Seoul-Washington alliance in East Asia. Kim Mo-kyun, Business Daily.
Meanwhile, Korean researchers estimate that a renegotiation of the Korea US FTA could result in losses worth billions of dollars for Korean companies, especially for the auto industry. But one local expert says the reason American car makers are struggling here in Korea is because of other reasons, not the trade deal itself. Our Kim Ji-yeon explains.
Eyes are edging toward the future of the South Korea-U.S. bilateral free trade agreement and its effect on the local economy. U.S. President Donald Trump reiterated his plan to start withdrawing from the deal during his visit to the hurricane-stricken city of Houston, Texas last weekend. The Korea Economic Research Institute estimates Asia's fourth largest economy would suffer losses of up to $26.5 billion over the next 5 years if tariff rates are adjusted upon a renegotiation of the free trade agreement. The automobile, machinery, and steel industries would face the biggest blows, with around 90,000 job losses expected in Korea's auto industry alone.
Although it may not be by as much as expected, Korea's imports of U.S. brand cars have actually increased in recent years. The lack of appeal of U.S. cars among Korean consumers is mainly due to lack of U.S. cars models Korean consumers crave, rather than price competitiveness stemming from the South Korea-U.S. deal.
Contrary to widely held beliefs, Korea's automobile exports to the U.S. fell sharply in 2016 from the previous year after the two countries slashed related tariffs. The Korea International Trade Association says the country's car exports to the U.S. tumbled by 9.5% last year to around 965,000 units. Under the terms of their free trade deal, Korea and the U.S. cut tariffs on automobiles from 2.5% to 0% at the start of last year. Kim Ji-yeon, Business Daily.
North Korea's sixth and most powerful nuclear test was enough to rattle South Korea's financial markets. And to tell us more about what further impact this might have on the local economy, Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Happy to be here.
So up until now, North Korea's nuclear tests seem to have had limited impact on financial markets, but this time things are feeling and looking a little different.
Okay, well, this just seems to be because now it's a hydrogen bomb rather than atomic bomb, and they also experimented with a missile that seemed to be able to reach the United States. So there seems to have been some selling, but it's not a panic situation. In fact, we probably could have expected just as much change just by the news of President Trump considering withdrawal from Korea US FTA alone. So given that situation, I don't think we're at a panic stage. And the closest example that we have, other than previous North Korean tests, is nuclear testing in India and Pakistan. Now, when they just tested their nuclear device, it didn't affect the global markets that much. It didn't affect the Indian local markets all that much. It did affect the Pakistani market, but according to Pakistani newspapers at the time, it was because of the domestic economic policies which were instituted around the same time. So, unless the hostilities increase, I think we'll stay basically at the same level. Maybe it'll recover a bit because Korean firms are doing very well, at least the ones that are traded in large volume in the stock market. But I think markets will continually be nervous.
So how would this latest provocation from North Korea weigh on investor sentiment from here on out?
Okay, well, so far, as I mentioned before, there does not seem to be a panic. Everybody seems to be nervous, but again, if the hostilities do not get worse and if there's no foreign panic, I think we'll recover because, well, that has always happened before, not only in the case of North Korea, but as I mentioned, India and Pakistan as well. So I think we'll be spending a very nervous few weeks. Maybe in case of India, I think they said that they had problems. They were nervous for about 2 weeks.
Okay.
But the problem is there's a possibility of further provocation and the belligerence by North Korea as well as U.S. President Trump. So that remains the wild card.
Now, amid possibilities that this could actually end up negatively affecting the real economy here in South Korea, I mean, there are also concerns that global markets may rate our economy in a negative way.
Okay, well, so far the ratings agencies have not changed their ratings. They did mention, some of them did mention that they are watching this very closely. But because the Korean economy has been picking up the first half of this year, I think unless the situation becomes a lot worse, I think they'll stick with the same credit rating as they have before.
Now, with geopolitical risks stemming from North Korea expected to continue throughout this month and the next, how should the Korean government and also the markets prepare? Okay,
well, we definitely need to make a contingency plan. One thing that I've been a bit disappointed in the new Moon administration is perhaps because they took power very quickly without adequate time to prepare, but they even seem to have caught by surprise in surprisingly many areas, and they did not always have a solid plan in place, not only in the areas of defense, but also in areas of economics. So I think we don't need to publicize it because we don't want to make the markets or people too nervous, but what will we do if what we fear happen? I don't mean a war, but I mean drop in the stock market, drop in demand. Then we probably need to increase fiscal policy. So we need to make contingency plans for that. Where and how are we going to increase the budget? Are we going to pass supplementary budget? If so, they should be prepared on which areas should we concentrate the budget spending on. And more importantly, Bank of Korea, they need to decide in this case whether they should raise the interest rate or lower the interest rate.
Right.
If you want to stop capital outflow, then the answer may be to raise the interest rate, but as we saw in the Asian financial crisis, that could devastate the domestic economy. Now, if we lower the domestic interest rate, then that will accelerate the capital outflow, so we may need alternate means to restrict capital outflow regulations or capital controls. Now, again, because such discussions make the market nervous, we should not make this public necessarily, but we do need to have the plans in place.
All right. Well, another source of concern is the possible termination of the Korea US FTA. Now, US President Trump had hinted at a possible termination of the deal over the weekend. But now with North Korea's latest provocation, eyes are on where this is headed from here on out.
Okay, well, right now the USTR seems to be hinting that because of the North Korean situation, perhaps they would delay the Korea-US FTA discussions. But there was an article published in Inside U.S. Trade yesterday, and it's sort of like a newspaper for trade issues, and they're usually reliable. And they've quoted anonymous sources as saying that when U.S. and Korea met in Seoul last week, the U.S. proposal was that Korea eliminate all agricultural tariffs, and the United States would not lower its tariffs, but rather they would delay lowering their agricultural tariffs by 5 to 10 years. Now, that is for the Korean government, that is absolutely impossible to accept. It'll be suicide politically. So I cannot help but wonder that if this article is true, then the Americans, the USTR, did not come to negotiate in good faith. They either, if they wanted to use this as a bluff, then it was an incredibly inept move. But if they did this knowingly, then they did not have any intention of negotiating seriously in the first place.
Then do you think the Korean government expected this scenario?
I do not think so, because according to the same article, the United States, well, they kept mentioning that they were concerned about steel, they were concerned about automobiles, they were concerned about trade deficits, and they talked about none of this.
Okay.
At least according to the article, it came completely out of the blue, and that may explain why both sides have gotten very hostile after the meeting.
So I guess we'll have to keep an eye to see where this negotiations or discussions over the Korea FTA is going. And we'll definitely keep an eye on the local stock market after North Korea's provocations over the weekend. All right. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Hyundai Motors production in China grounded to a halt once again due to another supply issue at one of its factories. A German firm based in the country had refused to supply auto parts due to issues regarding payment. Hyundai's plant in Hubei province was brought to a standstill as the delivery of air intake components was disrupted as a result. Now, this comes after work resumed on Wednesday at 4 of Hyundai's plants following similar issues with suppliers providing suspension parts and plastic fuel tanks. Korea's largest portal site, Naver, has been designated as a large corporation by the country's antitrust watchdog, subject to new regulations. Now, its founder, Lee Hae-jin, has also been labeled as its owner, a notion that has been rejected by the company. Our Eunice Kim has more.
On Sunday, Korea's Fair Trade Commission issued a list of 5 firms, labeling them as large corporations, or as some put it, quasi-chaebols. Among them was Naver, an online search engine powerhouse with a commanding 70% market share in Korea, and has extended its prowess into success in various commercial ventures. According to the corporate watchdog, Naver's total assets surpass the 5 trillion won mark, that's about $4.4 billion, spread out among its 71 affiliates, qualifying it for mandatory disclosure of corporate information, intended to improve overall transparency. The FTC also labeled the tech giant's founder, Lee Hae-jin, as its de facto owner, despite the fact that he has resigned from Naver's board chairmanship to focus on work as its global investment officer. His shares in the company also relatively small, amounting to 4.3%. He does come in as the 3rd largest shareholder after foreign investors and the National Pension Service, which collectively own some 20.8% of Naver's stocks. This makes the 50-year-old the largest shareholder with governing power, the antitrust watchdog explains, thus obligated to submit information on not only his own business activities, but also that of his relatives, to ensure there is complete transparency and no special business favors exchanged among them.
Minority shareholders with less than 1% stake own 50% of Naver's overall shares. In this regard, Lee's stake is significant.
Naver did not welcome the news, saying it views itself as a large corporation without an individual owner, instead with a transparent management arrangement headed by an elected board and CEO. In a statement, it said, quote, that Korea is unilaterally applying the same laws designed to regulate family-owned chaebol to private companies signifies the country's corporate regulations are outdated. Further, it said, quote, Korea must formally recognize more ownerless private companies to advance and foster an environment where such firms can grow in number. Local media has said Naver is considering a further response as the FTC could delve deeper into the search giant's business. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
The government may slash next year's infrastructure budget by up to 30% in order to accommodate its massive welfare drive. And these infrastructure cuts are painting a gloomy picture for the local construction sector. Our Lee Ju-young reports.
Roughly $19.6 billion. That's the total budget allocated to the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport for this year. But according to the latest budget proposal for 2018 from the ruling Democratic Party, the Finance Ministry's infrastructure budget could dip below $14 billion, which is 30% lower than this year. That's compared to the nearly $10 billion increase in the welfare budget. The justification is that there are now enough roads and railways to allow a slowdown in investments. But with the construction sector accounting for some 15% of Korea's GDP, experts fear the budget cut could lead to a hard landing for the housing market and the 1.9 million workers in the construction industry. One study showed that employment fell by 14,000 for every $900 million decrease in investment. The massive budget reduction is also expected to further exacerbate the real estate market, which has already cooled significantly due to tougher real estate measures launched early last month. With countries like Singapore and Hong Kong having revitalized their economies with active infrastructure investments, lawmakers are likely to clash on whether or not this budget decision is the right one. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that brings us to the end. Thanks for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.